Do you have a minute to answer some questions for us? Finish the sentence for me. What doesn't kill you makes you...
Stronger.
Yeah, stronger. Awesome.
Alive.
What doesn't kill you makes you alive. Awesome.
Stronger.
Stronger.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Stronger.
Awesome. Do you?
Stronger.
Stronger. Awesome.
Stronger.
Stronger, yeah.
But how do you believe that universities should handle controversial topics?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think they should maybe get people's opinions more and what they think about that topic. And then keep everybody's opinion in mind and go forward with keeping those opinions in mind.
Not sure about that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, just a little bit. I think making sure that they have the right support systems in place for students to access the support that they feel they need.
I think just informing people about both sides and they can make their own decisions and not trying to influence, like be unbiased.
They should be candid. I feel like they should be very open about it and just have those difficult discussions because I think people really learn more about cultural diversity and just educate themselves more if they're just honest and open about it.
I mean, try to find different perspectives and different different opinions on the situation and try to resolve it based on that.
Yeah. I also think we shouldn't hush people that have different opinions, and we should have some sort of freedom of speech. And if you do have an opinion that goes against others, you should be allowed to say it. And if people support you, it shouldn't be a bad thing necessarily.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to everybody that's watching online, or maybe you're over in Westside. My name's Pete, and I'm one of the pastors here. And you're joining us for a series called Good Intentions, Bad Ideas. We're all going to be okay. We're all going to be okay this morning. I wanted to begin with a thought that we as followers of Jesus, or maybe you're thinking about becoming a follower of Jesus, one of the important pieces to this puzzle, that as we build our life, is that we need to be students of culture. It's important that we are students of culture, that we don't just create our own church culture and then just ignore what's going on in the rest of the world, but that we actually pay attention so that we can engage, so that we can influence, so that we can speak into the culture around us. Because while we may not be of the world anymore, we are still very much for the world. And so I've crafted this series where we're going to look at some cultural ideas, some myths that are pervading our culture, and then look at how they interact with some ideas that we find in the Bible. And I'm getting these three myths from a book that I wanted to show you called The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And so in this book, the authors outline three myths that they believe are pervading our culture and are setting up the youth in particular for failure. They're kind of influencing our university lives, and then as people come out of university, it's flowing into the rest of culture. Now, as a bit of a disclaimer, I am not endorsing this book. So if you've read the book, or as we go through parts of the book, you're like, I don't like that book, I want to talk about another book, like the Bible. That's what I came here for. That's fine. I'm not endorsing the book. What I think is interesting, though, is that these guys, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, their job, in very many ways, is to be students of culture. And so I think as we want to be students of culture, it's helpful to look at some experts. And I think that the ideas that they bring up are at the very least interesting and worthy of some dialogue, and hopefully will challenge us. And you know where's a great place for dialogue? Life groups. You in a life group? You know what? Life groups launched today. Whoa, it's like we planned it. It's like we're like, let's do something really controversial a little bit. Get people, you want to get in a group to talk about this? Life groups are people that meet during the week, groups of 8 to 12 people usually. Sometimes they meet in people's homes. Sometimes they meet at the church. Sometimes they meet at Line. But it's a place where you can get to know others and where you can be known and you can grow in your faith in a community of people. Because as a big church, sometimes it's easy to come here and be anonymous, which is cool for introverts like me. You get to come here, nobody talk to you. That's like a win. But at some point, The goal is not to remain by yourself. The goal is to engage in community and be known and know one another. So I think this is going to be a good series for that. So we're going to look at these 3 different cultural myths, and here we go. They begin their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, by talking about peanut allergies. Peanut allergies. In about the mid-90s, leading up into the 90s, peanut allergies kind of like came on the scene. And what started to happen, according to them, was that parents started to react in fear of these peanut allergies. And so they started to keep peanuts away, particularly from young children. And this eventually evolved into, let's keep peanuts out of school. And now we get to where we are now, where when you send anything to school with your kids, it has a label on it that says like, not from peanuts, never been near peanuts, don't know the word peanuts. Like, you don't put any of that in there. My kids, who are like 9, 7, and 5, they know it. Like, if I accidentally put something in, they're like, Dad, what are you trying to kill my friends? I'm like, I'm sorry. So we had this going on from like the mid-90s to 2000, and when people studied the cases of peanut allergies from the mid-90s to about 2008, they found that the prevalence of peanut allergies multiplied by 3 times. Somehow all of our protecting of kids from peanuts, whether it was correlation or causation, for those of you statistics people, we were resulting in a 3 times multiple of people that were becoming allergic to peanuts. So in 2015, a study was done. They took 640 infants who were at risk for developing a peanut allergy. And they divided them into 2 groups. One group was gonna get no peanuts. No, they're not gonna, never near any peanuts. The other group was gonna many times a week be introduced to different peanut products. And they found a wild difference between the 2 groups in how they developed peanut allergies. One group, 3% of the kids developed peanut allergies. The ones who were introduced to peanuts several times a week. And remember, they were already predisposed to probably likely to develop a peanut allergy. So there was already that category of kids. 3% in the ones that were introduced to it. 17% in the group that were kept away from peanuts. And so the researchers concluded that our attempt to protect our children has actually increased the likelihood that they would be harmed. Our good intention, we should protect our kids, who would disagree with that, has actually resulted in a bad idea. They said this is just one example of a culture of safetyism. This is their term, that we are living in a time where there is a ramp up to a culture that is increasingly more and more a culture of safetyism. One of the authors, I heard him give a talk, and he used playgrounds as an example. He said, playgrounds used to look like this. I hear some of you laughing because you were there. You're on, this is you, and I mean, he's no longer with us, but we needed, it's evolution, it's a process. We need to weed them out, right? They used to look like this, and perhaps this was a bit much. And so the pendulum swings. We want to protect our kids, and now we have this. This was designed by a group of lawyers and moms, and super safe. And he suggests, so the book is about, so we want to protect, but perhaps in protecting, we're actually creating more harm. Perhaps in increasing the level of our safety, we're actually harming ourselves. They talk about how this idea of safety has undergone a creep. It has crept, and the definition keeps getting broader and broader and broader. Begins with physical safety, and now it's broadened to emotional safety. We don't just need to keep people physically safe. We need to keep them emotionally safe from ideas that might upset them, that might disturb them, that might challenge them. We need to keep people emotionally safe. And then they say that the idea creeps even further, and it has redefined the word trauma. Trauma used to be an objective thing. Someone could sit with you and analyze what has happened to you and what you're experiencing and decide whether or not you are experiencing trauma and had undergone a traumatic experience. But in this creep of safetyism, trauma, the definition of it, has moved from objective to subjective, which means I don't tell you whether or not you've had a traumatic experience, you tell me. And you can define trauma any way that you like. And if we have a culture where you can label anything that you experience as trauma and that wants to protect us because we are a culture of safety, well, boy, what a world we are going to create. You can label anything that you want as trauma-inducing, and the culture needs to protect you from it. It's a good intention. We want to help people. We don't want to hurt people. But is it potentially a bad idea? Another speaker that I heard talk about this, he said that we used to have helicopter parents. Helicopter parents are the parents that were hovering over their kids as they went through life, so that if they fell, if they encountered a mean teacher, they would be right there to send the email, and they would be right there to pick up their child. They were hovering. They were always ready to respond. He said our culture's now shifted. It's gotten even worse. We don't just have helicopter parents. We now have Zamboni parents. Zamboni parents, they don't wait for the kid to fall. They go ahead of the kid and smooth the road. They write the email to the teacher in the summertime. Let me tell you about Timmy and all the things that he's going to need from you. And blah, blah, blah. They go ahead of the child. It's a good intention. But is it perhaps a bad idea? In writing about safetyism, the writers of the Coddling of the American Mind say this: when children are raised in a culture of safetyism, which teaches them to stay emotionally safe while protecting them from every imaginable danger, it may set up a feedback loop. Kids become more fragile and less resilient, which signals to adults that they need more protection, which then makes them even more fragile and less resilient. The end result may be similar to what happened when we tried to keep kids safe from exposure to peanuts. A widespread backfiring effect in which the cure turns out to be a primary cause of the disease. Which leads us to our first myth that we will look at in the series. The myth that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. We used to say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. If it doesn't kill you, you can grow, you can learn from it, and you come back stronger. But our culture is saying, no, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. It is the great untruth of fragility, which raises a very interesting question for us to think about. Are you fragile? Are humans fragile? If we're fragile, then we should have a culture of safetyism to protect us at all costs. Are you fragile? Do you need protection? Maybe in some ways, but do you need protection from ideas? Do you need protection from words? Do you need the playground to be super safe? And is that good for you as a human as you develop? Are we fragile? Do we need protection? Before I read this book, I would have had two categories: fragile and resilient. There are things that are fragile, like the fine china, that can break. When stress comes upon them, they break. They're fragile. There are other things that are resilient. When stress comes at them, it bounces off. They stand strong. Before I read this book, I had those two categories. But the book introduces a third category that they get from another book called anti-fragile. A third category, anti-fragile. It's a book written by a guy named Nassim Taleb, and here's how he defines it. Some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors. Depriving complex systems of volatility, randomness, and stressors will harm them. They will weaken, die, or blow up. Some things are fragile. Some things are resilient. Some things are anti-fragile. They need stress, volatility, randomness, and disorder in order to grow. And if you deprive anti-fragile things from these, it actually weakens them. The hypothesis is this, that humans are anti-fragile. Humans are anti-fragile. Maybe not in every moment of your life. Maybe there's some nuances. When you're studying culture, man, it's just all nuance. But think if you can add this category. Now, it doesn't have to just be overprotect or become resilient and it's got to bounce off them. What if there's a third category of, no, the struggle is good. The chaos is good. It's making me stronger. There's a quote in the book from an ancient Chinese philosopher that might help you wrap your heads around this idea. He says, when heaven is about to confer a great responsibility on any man or woman, everything written thousands of years ago, just talk to the men, right? Not today. Responsibility on any man or woman. It will exercise his mind with suffering, subject his sinews and bones to hard work, expose his body to hunger, put him to poverty, place obstacles in the paths of his deeds so as to stimulate his mind, harden his nature, and improve wherever he is incompetent. Some things are anti-fragile. What do you think? Are humans perhaps anti-fragile? It's a tricky thing to wrap your head around. It's a tricky thing to practice. I have 3 children. And I've learned that as they grow older, I have to try to keep them anonymous in my illustrations. And so for this illustration, we'll just whittle it down to, it's one of my 2 boys. But one of my 2 boys in the past week or so wanted to try out for the rep basketball team, which is like the best kids in the city. And they're like 8 and 9-year-olds. And you've never tested your love if you haven't watched 8 and 9-year-olds play basketball and hope that one of them trips and loses control of the ball. You haven't, not enough laughing on that, but it's, when you're sitting there as a dad and you're like, come on, buddy. And you're like, I don't know if he's going to get much better during this practice, so I got to hope the other kids get worse somehow. But he loves basketball. He's the kid that goes to school every day, dribbling the ball in his way into school, dribbling on his way out of school. But when we got to this tryout, I realized he wasn't going to make it. There were 8 and 9-year-olds that could beat me at basketball. It was crazy, these skills. I'm like, who's teaching these kids? I thought this was the introduction to basketball. You guys came out of the womb playing basketball. I don't know what's going on here. So I'm watching and I'm like, okay, I don't think, maybe later, when I can teach him more things, then next year we're gonna get him on this team. But I'm like, I don't think he's gonna make it. So during one of the tryouts, the coach comes out and he goes, all right, parents, all parents come off the bench, and we all go in the hallway. And the coach gives us a little pep talk, probably try to calm all the parents down. But he says, okay, after today's tryout, we're gonna take all the kids and one by one, we'll tell them face to face whether or not they're gonna make the team. And I was like, whoa, you can't do that. My child is so fragile. You're going to smash him into a million pieces. You tell me, give me an email, and I'll tell him on the way to Toys R Us. That's how we should deliver this news. But I've been studying this idea, and so I was like, okay, maybe this is good. Maybe this will be good to have a bit of rejection, to experience a bit of failure. Within the safe confines of a loving family who can provide encouragement afterwards. And so we went and it was like, all right, buddy. And the coach was like, unfortunately, blah, 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 and didn't make the team. And it was hard. He wasn't just like, okay, no problem. We went home and there was tears. Some from me and some from him. And no. But it was hard. But I also saw the anti-fragility. I saw the bounce back. I saw I guess I just need to work harder. I guess we need to do the drills that I was doing at tryout. I need to practice those for the next year. I need to take seriously the team that I'm gonna be on, the house league team, and I need to learn there. I was like, he needs that bit of rejection to learn to grow. I don't know if you've experienced this in your own lives as you've learned different things. For me, my major journey of learning and growth has been in learning how to preach. And learning how to preach is really difficult. And like most things, in order to get good at something, you have to be willing to suck at it in the beginning. And learning how to get up on stage and suck in front of all your friends and peers is really hard. And you get negative feedback from people saying things like, you shouldn't say the word suck on stage. And you've said it 3 times now. And negative feedback like, where's the Bible? Because we're halfway through this message, we haven't even looked at the Bible. It's coming, it's coming. We're gonna get to the Bible, don't send me an email. But all of that negativity helps me grow. I'm not asking for any extra, by the way. There's enough negativity up here, it's fine. But it helps you grow. But unless you're willing to put yourself through that stress and that volatility, you don't grow. If you were to ask me, how many times would you like to preach? Like when you're perfectly ready, you have the message exactly how you want it, how many times a year would you preach? I'd be like, 1 time, maybe 2. It's hard, but when you sign up instead for, I'm gonna be on this cycle, on this train, and I'm gonna get up and do it, it forces you to grow. If I only preached when I felt like it, when I felt ready, I'd never grow and get better. Maybe you've experienced this. Are humans fundamentally fragile, or are we perhaps anti-fragile? And if that just goes for all humans in general, then how much more so for a human who has been infused with the power and the Spirit of God? That's what we believe as followers of Jesus. That we sign up to serve King Jesus. That we recognize our own brokenness and we come before him and he gives us a spirit that makes us into a new creation. If humans are anti-fragile, how much more are followers of Jesus? I think we find this all throughout, particularly the early Christians and the Christians who write for us the Bible, that they were so anti-fragile. The Apostle Paul, who writes more of the New Testament for us than any other writer, he was so anti-fragile. He was beaten multiple times. He was stoned. He had riots form around him. He had flesh torn off him, and eventually he was murdered. And he writes things for us, like we're about to read, to the church in Corinth. We're gonna look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4 in a second. And just think about how anti-fragile his mindset is to be able to write this. And see if he doesn't maybe challenge you to adopt some of the same mindset. He says this writing to the church in Corinth. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. He says, the God who, and he's referencing Genesis here, the God who in the beginning said, let there be light. That same God looked into you when and if you become a follower of Jesus, looked into the darkness inside of you and said, let there be light. And he placed a light inside of you so that you would know his glory, so that you would know who he is, so that you would experience the revelation of who God is that we find in Jesus. When you become a follower of Jesus, there is something placed inside of you. He goes on to describe this something. He says, but we have this treasure, this light, and it's in jars of clay, which are fragile things, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. When you become a follower of Jesus, though your body may at times feel like a jar of clay, that is to say, very fragile, inside of you has been placed an all-surpassing power. And because of that, Paul can write this. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. He might as well have just said, we are anti-fragile. You try to crush us, we bounce back. You try to make us feel alone, you're never gonna convince us of that. We are struck down, but you'll never destroy us. We just keep going. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in our mortal body. We carry around the story of Jesus, his life and his death. It's like Paul's saying, like, you, as you walk around as a Christian, you are reenacting the story of Jesus, his life, his death, and his resurrection. And so when you are struck down like he was struck down, what happens? Are you defeated and ultimately crushed? No, life springs out of you, which is why he can say, when we are crushed, we're not destroyed. When we experience death and suffering and pain and stress and volatility, you don't ultimately hold us down. What springs forth is life. I think you could phrase it this way, that what he's talking about is the anti-fragility of the cross. And that the more that you try to press us down, the more that Christ is revealed in us. Skipping down a few verses, he goes on, he says, therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, though the clay jar that is our outward body, that you can tear our flesh off of us, you can even kill our bodies, though outwardly it appears as though we are wasting away, inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles, which, remember, for Paul, he's talking about the people that are trying to kill you. He's not talking about like lighter things. He's talking about martyrdom. And he references that light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Outwardly, we may appear to be these fragile creatures, but as followers of Jesus, we are actually the most anti-fragile beings on the face of the earth. The church adopted this mentality, I think. I think that that's why you find writings like that in Paul. I think it's why that as you read the early church fathers, you find similar types of writings. And I want you to remember this phrase. It stuck with me for many years. It comes from an early church father named Tertullian. And Tertullian lived around the 2nd, 3rd century. And he wrote these words: the blood of the church, the blood of the martyrs, is the seed of the church. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Did Tertullian think the church was fragile? No. He's like, we're so anti-fragile that the more that you press us down, the more that we keep growing. So go ahead and keep killing us, because the church will just keep exploding. What is your mentality about you as a human person, about you as a follower of Jesus? Are you fragile? Are your political views fragile? Would you put them up for debate? Do you converse about them to either have them refined or destroyed? Do you want them to be critiqued so that they could be made stronger, or do you hold them as fragile? Are your ideas fragile, or are they anti-fragile? Is your self-worth fragile or anti-fragile? Is your faith fragile or anti-fragile? You know what, I almost titled this series. We had it in the planning center, and then, I was like, I can't do it. People won't come. I almost titled this series, The Coddling of the Canadian Christian. Ooh, I know. Don't worry, I'm not like above any of this. It hits me too. But I read Paul, I think about that quote from Tertullian, and I'm like, man, I wonder if the rest of the church globally and historically wouldn't look upon us and be like, you guys are so coddled. I hear it all the time. I feel it. The fear. The culture's changing. We need to be afraid. The Bible's under attack. We need to be afraid. I hear Christians who are afraid of other Christians from other churches. I'm like, oh, we're so afraid. because we hold our faith like it's so fragile. Here's some good news. Our faith is anything but fragile. Our faith is so anti-fragile. When placed under stress and volatility and disorder and suffering, it only grows stronger. I wonder when I think about sacrifice, when I think about the Jesus who we follow, King Jesus, who sacrificed for us and calls us to live a life of sacrifice, if the rest of the church wouldn't look at Western Christians and be like, yeah, how are you guys doing with that? We know sacrifice and we know suffering. How about you guys? Or would they maybe be like, you should have called this the coddling of the Canadian Christian? There's a popular kind of story, metaphor about a forest. And that a forest needs little bouts of volatility in order to protect it. And the little bouts of volatility are when little forest fires happen within the larger forest, because the little fires clear up the flammable brush. And so you have little fires instead of one massive fire that will wipe out the entire forest. And this is why volatility is good. This is why little bits of pain and sacrifice and suffering are good for us, because instead of wiping us out in one shot, they make us stronger. I wonder if living in a culture of safetyism, if the Canadian Christian, the coddled Canadian Christian, isn't setting themselves up for a firestorm that will wipe out their entire faith because they never put it under any stress. They tried to protect it at all costs. And in doing that, in trying to protect it at all costs, you have made it weaker. And so the challenge for us is, will we try to recover our anti-fragility? Will we try to recover it? And so I want to introduce this idea to you of the chaos monkey. How many of you have heard of chaos monkeys before? The chaos monkey. I just read about this. I am not a tech whiz at all. And if you are, then you will recognize the lack of tech knowledge as I try to explain this. But at Netflix and probably other tech firms, they introduce chaos into their systems to test them and make them stronger. And they call them chaos monkeys. So they have these programs that will actually attack their own servers to make sure that their servers can recover and deal with that volatility. They even have one that they call the chaos gorilla. And the chaos gorilla will shut down a whole server-like area. So it's like, we're gonna shut down the whole server that provides access to California to Netflix streaming and see if the rest of the system can recover and that our customers never experience a blip. Introducing chaos monkeys as a way to maintain and recover your anti-fragility. So I got two ideas, two ways that you could do this that I think might apply to many of us. The first one is this: challenge your mind. Challenge your mind. Maybe it's an idea about Christianity, some theological idea. Maybe it's something in the political realm. Maybe it's just some bit of wisdom that you've always subscribed to. Oftentimes we can end up with conclusions that we no longer know how to make the argument to get to the conclusion, which makes us extremely vulnerable. Because someone who does know how to argue really well will tear down your conclusion and you'll be left with like, well, they sound really smart. I'm really dumb. I don't know. Challenge your mind. Find something that you believe that you don't even know why you believe it. I don't know, a guy on a stage said it one time and I felt a strange warming of my heart, but I couldn't explain it. You should try to be able to explain it. Otherwise, you are accepting a fragile faith, a fragile position. The other chaos monkey that I want to, this needs a bit of a disclaimer. Some of us, here's what I've heard a lot of. Those were 4 different ways I could start the sentence. It felt very Michael Scott. Pre-COVID, I hear people often refer to pre-COVID as, I can't believe the way we used to live and how busy we were. And some people that say that were too busy and their lives were unhealthy. And COVID allowed them a chance to get healthy, and now you're in a healthy place. I don't want you to apply a chaos monkey to you. But some of us used to be busy and productive. And COVID made us lazy and fragile. We used to be so anti-fragile. You could add more things. We could take on more things, do more things, and you couldn't stop us. We would figure out a way to get it done because we believed that we could. And COVID made us lazy and fragile. And if you feel that shift, and instead of being like, I never want to go back there, you're like, I need to go back there and get back to the productive me, then introduce some chaos monkeys. Start saying more yeses than nos. If you're around long enough, you're gonna hear me give a sermon about saying no instead of saying yes. This is the opposite, because there's different people here, we need different messages. Start saying some more yeses. Oh, I could never give up that night of the week. Oh, I could never serve there. I could never be in this relationship, keep this thing going. Instead of pushing everything away, be like, no, I can because I'm anti-fragile. And while taking this onto my schedule will be painful in the beginning, will create some stress in my life in the beginning, I'm anti-fragile. And there is an all-surpassing power within me that kind of rigs the game in my favor. Whether or not you feel it, you are not a jar of clay. You have an all-surpassing power inside of you that makes you anti-fragile. Last idea. Nassim Taleb, in his book, Anti-Fragile, talks about the wind. And he says, the wind for a candle is dangerous because it'll extinguish a candle. But the wind for a fire, that energizes a fire. So he says, don't be like a candle. Be like a fire and wish for the wind. May you, my brothers and sisters, become more and more like a fire and wish for the wind. Let me pray, and then we'll go. God, we thank you for your amazing design of us, that we are anti-fragile. You built us to be able to handle the difficulties that come at us in life. And that when we become followers of Jesus, you pour a spirit into us that makes that 100x true. You place an all-surpassing power inside of us. God, may we learn to see ourselves the way that you see us. God, may we learn to spot the myth in our culture that we need to be protected from everything at all times. God, would you make us stronger? Would you make us unafraid? Would you make us a powerful force in our culture that is able to engage and influence and speak into it? Jesus, we ask for your wisdom and discernment as we think about these things this week. Would you be with us in our life groups? Holy Spirit, would you empower us? We pray these things in the strong, resurrected name of Jesus. Amen.